Well, good morning, fellow constitutionalists, and welcome to the Thursday edition of the Dan Clements Show, a Christian political talk show. I'm your host, Dan Clements, your constitutional warrior, fighting for your right just to be an American. It is November 30th in the year of the Lord 2017. Remember, we're a hyphen-free, PC-free zone. God is still in control, and He does love you. And I'm broadcasting live from the Hemlock Studios in the beautiful central Susquehanna Valley in the great Keystone State. Just a little office cleaning to do here. I do apologize for the first 3 days of this week. I had to get my boiler completely finished so they could put the bottles in. I thought I was going to get the propane bottles Monday, but since the furnace wasn't finished, their regulations, not ours, company rules, they would not hook up the gas lines so I could, when I got done, I could fire it up. They have to be there when I fire it up. So I was working diligently for almost 8 hours. I shouldn't have worked that long Monday because I was really in a lot of pain when I stopped. I was in so much pain I couldn't do anything Tuesday, including the show. Yesterday I finished up, and it only took me like 4 or 5 hours to do the rest of the grunt work, and then I had some just little nagging things like thermostat wires, and I'm putting in the exhaust pipes today, the vents for the condensing furnace, and hooking up just the water supply to the furnace, and I'll be done. And all I gotta do is check for leaks, and hopefully next week they'll come in to put my bottles in. So I do apologize for that. The other thing is yesterday was the 35th anniversary of my twin sister's death in a automobile accident. She was in the Navy coming home from Thanksgiving in Iowa, heading back down to Dallas-Fort Worth Naval Air Station. And she got in an accident with a tractor trailer, and she was killed instantly. So this was 35 years ago yesterday. And it's still weighs heavy on my mind this time of the year. The weather this year, more than most years, reminds me of that time of the year when she passed away. And then when we laid her to rest a few days later out in southern Ohio, it was in the upper 60s, lower 70s that day in December when we had the funeral service. So I just wanted to say that. I know it's weighing heavy on my mom's mind, and so I just wanted to get that out of the way there. Now, like I said, hopefully from now on I won't have any big projects like that I have to get done like that. So we won't be interrupted on the show anymore. I'm sorry, I got a little bit of a frog in my throat. I was going to do something different on the show today because I know we've used past shows here recently talking about net neutrality, and I'm not a big, to put this out, I know some folks on some other channels that I've been leaving comments on are going to come over and check out my show and think, well, he only has a handful of subscribers, which that's true. I've only been on the internet for like 6 months, so I haven't been on here for years and years and years. Like Philip DeFranco and some of these other folks Philip DeFranco now has like 1.5 million subscribers to his channel. But he's been on YouTube since the mid-2000s, I think. So he's had a long time to work and build up his audience. And I'm just starting out. And so, it's going to come to a point where there's going to be that one magical show, I guess you can call it, that people are going to start sharing and hopefully say that, this guy... he tries to put the truth out. He tries to get things right, and he's honest in his appraisal of things, and will start sharing it with their friends, and then it'll grow there. Lord willing, that'll happen someday in the near future. So I've been leaving comments about net neutrality on a channel called Barnacles. That's the first part of it. I can't remember. Let me see if I can get back over here real quick and see one of his comments here. Barnacles Nerdgasm. And again, some of these channel titles, I don't know. I just don't know. And I can't watch a lot of his videos. He's a tech guy, and I like some of his the way he has his office set up. I like some of the equipment he uses in that. And he used to work, I think it was for Windows, Microsoft, one of the two, as a programmer. So the guy's fairly intelligent. But his language could use some improvement. I mean, like I said, it's hard for me to watch a lot of his videos because his language gets so foul. And even in this latest one, which I'll link to, he doesn't he doesn't get foul, but I want to caution everybody, there is some adult content in there, some suggestions he has for the president, which honestly, I know YouTube's an open free platform, and it isn't regulated by the FCC, okay? Although, and this is where I gotta laugh about this whole situation. They're on a platform that they can say just about anything they want, any profanity they want, and about the only thing that's going to happen to them is they get put in restricted mode. Which, if they're going to use that foul language, they need to automatically put themselves in restricted mode, but they don't. They just don't do that. So, YouTube has to go and put them in restricted mode because, especially about their foul language. And, not that it's not my habit to use foul language, so hopefully this show will never be put in restricted mode unless it's some of the ideas I put forth. But they like using this vehicle called YouTube to put out their message. Okay, and they don't want that censored or you censor them or you regulate them or put them in restricted mode. I mean, they're screaming and blowing the rooftops off their houses. Okay, but on the other hand, they want the FCC, which regulates language on TV, which regulates language on radio, what you hear over the airwaves. They regulate that. They want the FCC to regulate the internet. And it's like, folks, these people, and it's not, I won't say that they're hypocritical, because honestly, I don't think they've thought it through completely. I think that, and this is the title of my show today, pro-net neutrality folks don't understand how free markets actually work. Most of the comments that I find on the internet, most of them, that people are actually supporting net neutrality are socialistic in nature. That's what they were taught in our government schools. That's what, they follow politicians like Bernie Sanders who are socialist. And I'm not saying Barnacle follows Bernie Sanders. I don't know who he voted for in the last election. He said he didn't vote for Obama. And I'll take him at his word that he didn't vote for Obama. I certainly didn't vote for Obama. But they want the internet to be free and open as possible, but the only way they see to do that is through government regulation. Now, I have this comment. I'm not going to read the name, and there's one profanity in it. Let's see here. It's up here. Oh, wow, they're coming in fast and furious now. I was trying to get to the one that I just... okay, here's one. I won't say who it was. And he says, because it's unfair, and I can't read the rest of that sentence, it's unfair, Dan. Someone should not be punished for trying to make a living just because their line of work or hobby uses more bandwidth. You cannot compare electricity with the internet. And that's what I was comparing in my message. You absolutely can, because guess what? 2015, when the net neutrality rules came in, the internet was classified as a type 2 utility. Not before this. Now, a lot of these guys are conflating this, saying, oh, it's always been a type 2 utility. No, it hasn't. It was not classified as one until the Obama administration and their FCC chairman at the time labeled it as a type 2 utility, saying you can't live without it. And there's judges that have ruled in court rulings, oh, you can't live without it. Okay? And he's talking about it being, this is where I'm coming down on this, they don't know how free markets work. He said, shouldn't be punished because their line of work uses more bandwidth. Now, I have, and I'll say this, I have Service Electric Cable Television is my internet provider. They went through back in the mid-90s and laid fiber optic throughout their whole system. And they got a big chunk of this area in Pennsylvania. They are a TV provider, an internet provider, and they also, if you want to buy the whole bundle, you can get your telephone over the internet through their VoIP service. Now, I have my own, which actually costs cheaper for me to have my own than to go through their bundles, but be that as it may, last year, now this is all under net neutrality, last year they split up some packages and actually increased, not the amount of money I pay, but they actually increased how much bandwidth I can get. I'm at like 15 download and 5 or 6 or something like that. I have to go back and look. Upload speeds, megabits per second upload speeds, which is pretty good. But to have those speeds, I had been increasing it over time. In this last spring, because I started doing the YouTube show, I did not have enough bandwidth for the month to do my YouTube show and other videos, plus being able with the speeds I needed to keep up with, I was simulcasting on Blog Talk Radio and YouTube, and I just wasn't able to keep up, so I bought the bigger package and everything smoothed out for me. Okay? So again, there is a comparison there, because if I go from a 200 amp to a 400 amp service, PP&L is going to come into my house here, and they're going to wonder why I want a 400 amp service, and they're going to, rightly so, be able to inspect the property, because that's part of the terms of service, to see where I'm using electricity. And if I have a business set up, let's say I put a welding shop in the bottom of my garage, and I'm commercially welding for folks, making money off of that, they rightfully can charge me either two ways they can do this. They can charge my whole electric bill at a commercial rate, or I can separate them out and they can put a meter on my garage, and I can run a 200 amp service there and a 200 amp service to the house, and have residential prices at the house and commercial prices at my business. And just because I'm running a business doesn't mean, why should I get extra breaks for that? If my line of business, where I have to start using more electricity, it puts me in a higher usage tier, which means I'm just moved into the realm of commercial usage. Why shouldn't the utility company be able to charge me more for that? They're utility. The power companies are type 2 utility. Second, with type 2 utilities, they are government-created monopolies. Whether they were created on the federal level, which they were not, they were just classified as that at the federal level. And on the state levels, these I'm going to stick with the power companies at first, especially here in Pennsylvania, where I live. The power companies got exclusive use on the government's right-of-ways, on the roads and everything, to actually put up poles. They have to pay for that, to put up poles, put up the wire, and put it to the house. And this was all under government regulation. Well, what happened a handful of years ago in Pennsylvania, that the state decided that they were going to deregulate the electric industry, electric companies in the industry, because one of the things that was happening was they were not allowed to charge market rates for their electricity the whole time they were under regulation. They were not allowed to charge market rates. Now, if you're not allowed to charge market rates and everything else you use, and this is the thing that people forget about, or they don't even know because they weren't educated in this, everything else that they're using, the transformers, the poles, power poles, telephone poles, whatever you want to call them, the nuts and bolts that they use, the actual wire that they were stringing, are not under government regulation as far as what they can charge for market prices. So as those prices increased over the years for these supplies to keep the service going or to build new services and stuff like that, they weren't able to keep up with that because they were stuck at a non-market rate for the electricity. But what happened was that, I'll stick with PP&L, what happened with PP&L was that they deregulated PP&L here in Pennsylvania. So PP&L, what they did was they have the transmission lines. So what they did, you can still buy electricity off of PP&L generation plants, or there's at least a dozen I know of, if not more, other companies you can actually buy your electricity off of and still have it transmitted over the PP&L lines, okay? And PP&L has like a set rate for that to do on their lines, and that has been pretty static over the years here. It's gone up a little bit, but not much. And then you pay for a generation cost, how much it costs to generate the electricity that you use, and you can shop around for that. I've actually saved as much as 3 cents, 3 cents a kilowatt hour. Now, talking about regulations with electricity, and we'll get back over to the internet here real quick. when the Obama administration's Clean Air or Clean Coal Act, whatever you want to call it, came in, they shut down a couple of our coal generation plants in this area. And guess what happened to my electrical cost? Since I couldn't buy that cheaper coal electricity, I had to go out and shop for something more, which my base price jumped almost 3 cents a kilowatt hour. And that's, you know, for a family of three, you know, which we're not totally dependent on electricity, but we do use a lot of electricity in this house, my computers, electric hot water heater, stuff like that. My electric bill jumped. And it did hurt our budget. Okay, now they're actually building a gas-powered, natural gas-fired plant here, and that should bring and that's not by PP&L, it's by another company, and that should bring our prices down a little bit again. But it was through regulation that this happened. Now, go over to the internet. The biggest problem with the internet, and this is what everything's getting conflated here, and it needs to be pulled apart. You have government on local, state, and federal level. The biggest problem that ISPs have and consumers have, I wouldn't say ISPs, but the biggest problem consumers have is the ISPs have come in years ago, got these right-of-way permits and these infrastructure permits from the different municipalities that make them the only one allowed to provide this service. Let's say we just get rid of the DSLs and stuff and just deal with cable, okay? That they're the only ones allowed to deliver high-speed internet over these cables because they got this agreement with local municipalities. Now, there are some states, I think Kansas is one of them, that the state had made a state law saying that was illegal to do that. That local municipalities cannot create these small monopolies in their areas. It was illegal, you know, they passed a state law. So now competition can come through, okay? And I envision the same thing happening to cable, Service Electric Cablevision as PP&L. They have the fiber optic lines up, and they're not even, if you talk to their techs, they're not even using a fraction of the bandwidth that can go through those fiber optic cables. They're just not, you know, because fiber optic cables can deliver so much bandwidth. It's just ridiculous how much bandwidth they can deliver. So I envision Service Electric Cable one day thinking, you know what, well, let's get out of the ISP, or let's at least separate these two out, just like PP&L did, still offer the ISP, but then sell the unused bandwidth that they're not using to other people. And through competition, that'll drive prices down. Every time there's competition that takes place, prices drop. That's just an economic truth out there. Okay? And so the idea, again, that these pro-net neutrality folks have about what the free market is, and I heard Barnacle say this in his video, he was like, in order to have the free markets in the internet, we need regulations. Well, that's honestly, folks, that is as ignorant of a statement as George W. Bush back during the economic meltdown in 2008. We need to abandon free market principles to save the free market. You can't abandon these type of principles to save that same thing which you're trying to save. It didn't work. We went into one of the longest recessions in the nation's history because of this idea we need to abandon the free markets to save the free markets. That's almost like, and maybe this is maybe going a little too far here with the analogy, but that's like, you know, you have a baby that's in distress, you know, newborn infant that needs some medical attention, is in distress. That's like saying, well, in order to save the baby, we need to let the baby survive on its own. You know, that doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. You got to save the free market, you got to abandon free market principles. No, in order to save the free market, you have to employ or implement free market principles to save the free market. Just like in order to save that distressed baby, you just don't leave it on its own. You have to have medical intervention to help save that distressed baby. Now, I have some comments that have been flying into my chat here. Let me just go over here and read these real quick. All right, I'm just going to start reading some of these. It doesn't say exactly who this is from. It says, don't buy into the hype. Can't convince people who aren't open to discussion, especially on Barnacle's videos. You are dealing with a lot of dogmatic people who take Barnacules' word as gospel. And that's, I'd have to agree with this person here. He says, don't buy into the hype. Also, people talking about fees don't seem to understand that bandwidth is not free for the ISP, but the services like Netflix are leeching. And I made a comment on Barnacules' video. Some of the biggest bandwidth hogs out there, besides the streaming video sites like Netflix and that, and I'm not saying anything against them, are gamers. They use a lot of bandwidth to play online games, and they got these huge rigs, and you know, they're like me. They have huge bandwidth contracts with the ISP, but they don't want to have to pay as much as I pay for it because I'm a business and I need this bandwidth. Says, don't buy into the hype leeching bandwidth despite being a huge percent of internet traffic. Regardless, can't have a discussion with people if they don't want to listen. Big problem right now. Don't buy into the hype. A lot of people claiming to hear but not really listening. Conversations can't occur in this environment. It's too bad. And this user is absolutely right. This person is commenting on my comments line here, or the chat room, is absolutely right. I could not, for whatever reason, even though I was trying to explain to them what free markets were, free markets are actual places of exchange free from government regulation. That the regulation in free markets is competition. If you and I are selling the same widget at the same time, and it's at the same price, the only difference that can be in it maybe is quality. And maybe some customers have put out on, and I'm going to use Yelp because I like Yelp. Let's say some customers put some reviews out on my product on Yelp saying, although his product is company A's product is the same price as company B, the quality is not as good and the customer service is not as good at company A as it is at company B. And a guy like me that's on the internet, and I shop a lot on the internet, and I do my due diligence and research, I do look at customer reviews. And those customer reviews can either make or break a company. Okay? Matter of fact, I use this story a lot when I was dispatching. My last full-time job in the trucking industry before I got laid off. In dispatch, I got laid off, but they moved the dispatch to a town I couldn't drive to. It was almost 3-hour drive away. Well, actually about 2 hours, but with traffic, sometimes it get up to 3. So they laid me off. But we were taking bananas out to a Walmart warehouse outside of Columbus, Ohio, down Washington Courthouse, actually. And then we were going up over towards the Indiana border and picking up eggs and bringing them back. Well, this company, luckily, none of the eggs got out to Pennsylvania, but around Ohio there, where they were selling them locally, they got a bad batch of eggs that got a bunch of people sick with salmonella. And I'm telling you, it didn't even take much more than a week. And they said, well, we can't pick up eggs there anymore. A week later, I was trying to check with the broker who was brokering those eggs out, and he told me it was 2 weeks now. For 1 week, we weren't allowed to even pick up eggs there anymore. They weren't shipping. The second week said they're totally out of business. Because of all the eggs that were returned and the sales dropped, they weren't getting reorders and stuff like that. They had to sell their chickens. They just went out of business within a couple of weeks. And this was all they had, TV, radio, newspaper items, talking about the salmonella outbreak of the egg manufacturers. They don't actually manufacture them. The chickens lay them, but you know what I'm talking about. These egg producers, as it were. So it's really funny how people, again, I'll go back to the beginning of my rant here. They're on YouTube. They don't want to be censored by YouTube. They don't want to be regulated by anybody on YouTube whatsoever. And that's okay. I understand that. But then the internet that actually allows them to get to YouTube, they want all sorts of regulations put on it. Now, the one thing, like I said, I'm gonna link to Barnacules' video here and let you go listen to it yourself. One of the fallacies he put in there was that the federal government isn't trying to control the internet. Well, that is just an out-and-out falsehood. Because when you regulate something, what are you trying to do? What are you trying to do? On my furnace, in my house, I'm on a well. I have a well pump. I have an expansion tank and everything. I keep my water pressure in our house about between 40 and 50 psi, usually around 45 psi. But my furnace, I can only run 15 psi through that. So what do I have to do with the water pressure coming into the furnace? I have to regulate it. I have to reduce it. So I have to put a regulator on it. And actually, I put a regulator with a backflow preventer on it. So, in case it, for whatever reason, in case the water starts backflowing the other way, it can't get into my water system and poison my family or anything like that, or hurt us or anything. But I have to regulate it. I have to regulate the 45 psi because I don't want that in my furnace. I have to regulate that down to 15 psi. And what do you think is going to happen with government regulations? It already happened with the utilities as far as electricity. The government said people can't live without utilities, so we need to make it a class 2. So, these electric companies have to go out to all these areas where they wouldn't normally go out because of the cost of it, but they have to go out to all these areas because people need electricity. Well, my question is, what were they doing before they had electricity? And how do the Amish and the Mennonites survive without electricity? They survived for hundreds of years without electricity. They still do today. Now, they do rely on electricity a little bit, but not like you and I do. Okay, and even if I need electricity to live, does that give the federal government the right, the authority to regulate that? No. And one of the more basic questions that needs to be asked with these pro-net neutrality folks is it constitutional for the government to be doing this? That's a whole other can of worms that I haven't even opened up yet on some of these chat rooms or some of these comment sections on these videos about the constitutionality of the FCC in general, or the FTC, or the FDA, or the Department of Interior, Department of Energy, Department of Education, the EPA. That's a whole other can of worms we can get into if you want to, but I'm going to forewarn you that the Constitution's on my side. And not that I came to the Constitution thinking that, I had a preconceived idea about how things should work and I'm using the Constitution to prove that. I went to the Constitution to see what it has actually said about the federal government, what it was allowed and not allowed to do. And it's real easy when you go to the Constitution to actually check that out to see what the federal government is allowed or is not allowed to do. It's just that simple, folks. And so I didn't even open up that can of worms yet. And viewing some of the comments that are coming in that I've left on these different videos, and if you're on YouTube, if you go to your channel and you commented on something on somebody else's video, or someone leaves a comment on your video, it pops up there in your comments, your notifications. And especially and when I subscribe to somebody, I hit the notification button because I want to be informed about new videos and comments and stuff like that. These comments are really coming up. Well, it's unfair. It's unfair, Dan. What's fairness have to do with it? What does fairness have to do with it? I mean, life's unfair. If your mom and dad didn't teach you life's unfair, then they did a poor job on raising you. No one guarantees you that life's going to be fair. No one has ever given you a guarantee that you're going to get everything you want in life. If you don't get everything you want in life, is that fair? Now, if I work for something, put my blood, sweat, and tears into working for something, and I have a possession, and you come and take that away from me, is that fair because I have something you don't have? No, that's called theft. And I could hold you accountable before the bar, before the law. And I would be right and just to do so. Whoever guaranteed, this is the other thing about equality, whoever guaranteed anybody equal outcomes in life. Now that's what government tries to do. That's what socialism tries to do. That's what fascism, socialism, communism, these authoritarian political systems that throttle economies and the economy of certain countries. And don't be fooled for 1 second that these regulations are not fascist in design or in nature. Anytime the government rules over or regulates an industry without owning it, guess what that's called, folks? In its most basic term, it's called fascism. And then you step up to socialism, which socialism has the government actually owning the means of productions and controlling the output of those means of production. So, again, you need to define your terms. You need to know what these terms are. Matter of fact, fascism, I looked this up. There's a video. I didn't believe the guy at first, so I started looking it up. And sure enough, modern dictionaries have actually changed the definition of fascism from what it was over 100 years ago. You know, now the best example for fascism was Nazi Germany, the Nationalist Socialist Party. Okay, but they took fascism to its logical extremes. Stalin's Russia, Lenin's Russia, after the Bolshevik Revolution, took communism to its logical extremes. And what do I mean by that? If you didn't get with the program and you wanted to fight the program, guess what? The state took you out. The state took you out. Fascism, socialism, communism. All three of them do the same thing. If you don't get along with the program that the state puts out, they're going to take you out. And people don't realize that. And when you talk to them about the free markets, they have been brainwashed and indoctrinated so much against the free markets that they're so scared of them. But in actuality, if you look at it in your real life, you go to the grocery store, how many choices do you have? And you just pick your product, any product on the shelf. How many choices do you have? You have at least two, minimum two. And I've hardly ever went in the grocery store where you didn't have more than two, but let's say you have at least two. So there you have a choice. There you're making a free market decision to buy A over B, or C or D or F, whatever the case may be. Matter of fact, in our country, I don't have to go to Wise Markets, which is one of our big local supermarket chains. I can go to Giant Supermarket, which is another big regional chain. Or I can go to Aldi's and buy food. Or I can go to Surplus Outlet, which is a very local chain, and exactly what it says is a surplus outlet with food and everything. I can go there. I don't have to go to the specific store. And guess what's that called, folks? That's two things. It's called free market competition. Your gasoline, when you buy gasoline, do you shop around for the best price on your gasoline? I do. What's that called? It's called the free market. Oh. You mean people have been practicing free market principles throughout their life and they don't even know it? Yep, absolutely. They don't even recognize it. Every day you make a choice between item B and item C or D or F or A, you are participating in the free market. That we have a market that has such is plentiful enough to give you choices in what you want to buy. It's that simple, and this is what frustrates me. People do this every day of their life, but when you try to extrapolate that out to the actual businesses, it just goes out the window. They cannot fathom that Wise Market competes against Giant and Aldi and Surplus Outlet and some more mom and pop small stores that they actually compete against, and they have to do things right in order to keep customers. They have to take care of the customers, and if they don't, guess what? There's other places you can go. This is not so when it comes to the internet because of local monopolies created by the government. And what we need to do, I know Barnacle said, well, they had a town hall meeting about this and our local government just decided they were going to blow them off. Well, either run for office in your local town and take over it so you can get rid of these net neutrality things, or get a hold of your state representatives and do like what, I'm pretty sure it was Kansas, I'll have to go back and read this article again, do what Kansas did at the state level, saying it is illegal for the towns to have these monopolies with these internet providers. They cannot have these exclusive contracts, and just do away with it at the state level. And this is one of the states that Google actually went into and started laying their fiber optic cables. And one of the reasons why they haven't gone into other cities is because of these local monopolies that have been created. They can't compete against that. They have a certain threshold that they want to spend to put in these fiber optic networks, and they're not going to go over that. So it's not that they can't compete. Google has enough money they could, but they've set up limits on themselves so they can remain profitable. Excuse me. Don't buy into the hype. The Constitution is a living document, or so the corrupted politicians would want you to believe. And this is not, it's not only dude or dudette. I'm not sure which it is. It's not just corrupt politicians. It's the corrupt citizenry that has bought into this, that has not done their due diligence. And this is something that Barnacle says throughout his whole video. And this is not a rebuttal to Barnacle's. His was the biggest one I've seen so far. And this will sort of turn out to be a rebuttal, but he's talking about all these regulations and stuff like that, and all these, and these folks that they just don't get it. I like the free markets. I like free market capitalism. There's nothing evil about capitalism. There is something evil about what I call corporatism, or what's more familiar to folks is crony capitalism. And that's exactly what ISPs are doing at the local level. They are practicing crony capitalism. They do not want competition. They do not want competition. And you know what? Secretly, I believe, and I think I can prove this with this article, but maybe not. But secretly, I think the big ISPs that everybody's complaining about, Comcast, Verizon, AT&T, and stuff like that, I think secretly they're hoping for net neutrality, because guess what that is? That's crony capitalism. That means they can pay politicians to keep them as and their competitors apart. And one last thing before I get into my advertisements, I know my monologue has gone into too far. This all started, and in my research, it hasn't gone any further back than this, because I couldn't find any other examples on the internet and elsewhere, and I didn't have time to really deep dive into it. But back in the late 1800s, the dairy farmers of America went to the government to try to get laws passed against the oleo manufacturers in America at that time. I did not realize, and a lot of people may not know that term, oleo. It's margarine, okay? It's what, made out of vegetable oil, stuff like that. This was invented clear back in the 1800s, and these folks that are making oleo were making it cheaper. It tasted like butter, looked like butter, but it wasn't butter. And they were making it cheaper than the dairy farmers could make actual real butter. And so what the dairy farmers did was they brought suit against the oleo producers to try to stifle that competition. And that was one of the first examples I could find in law anyway, where one company was suing another company over competition. And this is what we're having today. We have all this crony capitalism going on, and people don't even realize it. Every time a company or business goes to the government to get preferential treatment, whether it's a local, state, or federal level, that's called crony capitalism. And as soon as you see that, you can just bet your bottom dollar that there's no competition in that market for that product, whatever it is, if they get their concessions, like cable companies or like internet providers in these cities like Comcast. Service Electric, same way. Although a lot of the cities that they compete in have DSL, but that doesn't put the bandwidth out as cable does. And so again, actually these cable companies need to be deregulated and make it such that these other providers, like these electrical providers with PP&L handling the transmission lines, can compete for your dollars on the internet. Well, today's show is being brought to you by Rocky Mountain High Brands. This is a carbonated drink that has 100 milligrams of hemp oil in it. And they come in different flavors like black tea, mango energy, berry energy, coconut, lime energy drinks. They have lemonade, which is my preferred drink. They have power shots, caffeinated power shots. The only one that doesn't have caffeine in it actually is a lemonade, which is the one. That's why I normally drink that one. They have protein bars with hemp oil in it. They have alkaline spirit water, or Eagle Spirit water. It's called. It's an alkaline-based water. And I made this the official drink of the show because, just for clarification and full disclosure, I do own stock in the company, and hopefully someday that they'll do they'll do good, and that the investment will be returned on my meager investment into them. Okay. Today's daily Bible reading comes from the Gospel of Luke chapter 12, verses 31 through 34. But seek the kingdom of God, and all these things shall be added to you. Do not fear, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell what you have and give alms. Provide yourselves with money bags which do not grow old, a treasure in the heavens that does not fail, where no thief approaches nor moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Now, this verse, and there's other verses to support this, this is not saying that we need to be poor and paupers. He's not saying that at all. But where do we have our faith in? Do we have our faith in earthly treasures or heavenly treasures? And that's what Jesus is trying to say. This is Jesus talking here. You know, you need to have your treasure in heaven. It doesn't mean you need to be broke here on earth all the time, but you have to have your treasure in heaven. And you need to, and that's a good, if you really want a good Bible study, that's a good Bible study to get into about that, because there's a lot of people out there, you know, that are, you know, oh, we got to live poor, meager lives, and that's just not true. You know, it's however God chooses to bless you and your talents that you have in these different areas that the Bible describes. Today's quote meal comes from Charles H. Spurgeon. I love this. Learn to say no. It will be of more use to you than to be able to read Latin. And far too many, and I talked about this weeks ago, about, oh, we got to agree to disagree. No, I'm not going to agree to disagree with you. Now, if it's a matter of opinion, like what's the best color to put on an office wall or something like that, then yeah, we can agree to disagree. But if it's a matter of, let's say, doctrine or law, we can't agree to disagree. There has to be a right and there has to be a wrong, and it has to be gotten down to the bottom of it. And too many people today, I think, are, I'm just going to say, I think too many people are lazy to actually go out and do the research or want to discuss it with folks. I think they really are. And today's short Bible lesson, I think it's a good one. You need to go over and read this, folks. It's by Jack Wilkie from focuspress.org. He posted this yesterday. A dangerous trend in the churches of Christ. And he gets to the point right away on that. And I encourage you to go to the danclementshow.com and the show notes page. It'll be up right after the show. And I encourage you to go over and read that article. Now, let's see here. Don't buy into the hype. He's put a lot of comments up here. They're good comments. I'm just going to read them. Don't buy into the hype. I find it hard to believe that local municipalities can go against the local monopolies with the resources large corporations have. They can dissuade through endless litigation? ? Interesting conundrum. Well, yeah. If an ISP came in and paid these local municipalities for this contract for I don't know how many years they have of these right-of-ways, and the ISP comes in and tries to, or the local community tries to come in and break that contract, it is a contract. Good, bad, or indifference, the local community signed that contract wrongfully, I might add, but they signed it nonetheless, and it is an enforceable contract by law. And these municipalities, if they want to break this, they have to pay whatever percentage of the money, you know, divide it by years or whatever, they have to pay that back to the ISPs, and most of the time these municipalities do not have that extra money laying around to pay back these ISPs. And so then you're in a, as my friend says here, you're in a conundrum. What are you going to do? And just this last comment, keep up the good, I guess it's don't buy into the hype is the name of the name of this. Keep up the good fight, my friend. We truly are in the midst of a spiritual battle. Appreciate your willingness to speak your mind. And that's... My wife might not agree with you about that all the time. She thinks me speaking my mind can get me in trouble a lot. And I told her, no, I'm not in trouble. Just the people that disagree with me or don't look at... And look, folks, I don't care if you don't look at things the right way. But you know what? Words mean things. Ideas mean things, and you cannot conflate right and wrong. You can't say, and this is an oxymoron, right? You can't say that government regulations are going to keep the internet free. It doesn't work that way. free markets in the internet is the lack of government involvement. And again, we could get into the Constitution, and I know some of these guys' head would just twist right off their shoulders because I would confuse them so much. Not that I'm confusing, but because they were never taught these things. Like the Commerce Clause. Real quick here before I get into some other my stuff here. A lot of people think that the Commerce Clause gives the government the right to regulate interstate commerce, commerce between the states. That's the modern meaning of the Commerce Clause, of the word commerce. Back when the Constitution was framed, it had a whole other meaning to it, which is the meaning we have to go back to. Original intent, in other words. The original intent of and the original meaning of the Commerce Clause is to make commerce regular. Not to regulate, to make it regular. That means one state cannot penalize another state. And the example I use, and this is some of the examples that other scholars use, like the state of New Jersey cannot use the fact that they have seaports to tax a tariff on products coming from Pennsylvania crossing through New Jersey and using their seaports. Now that doesn't mean that, and I was in the trucking industry, I'm third generation truck driver, that doesn't mean that the state can't charge taxes on the fuel to help pay for the roads that your trucks might be going over. I'm going to use it in modern day vernacular here. And that's perfectly, if the state wants to do that, that's fine. But the state cannot charge a tariff can't charge a tariff at all, because that would make Pennsylvania goods more expensive than other ones. So again, it's, like I said, if you start getting into some of these, and to me, they're not deep subjects. To me, the Constitution is very easy to understand if you're just willing to use a dictionary, an 1828 dictionary, and define terms of the modern vernacular when the Constitution was written. It's not hard. It's not rocket science. The Constitution is really, really easy to understand if you just give it a little. If you would put as much time in, and I'm going to use gamers, if you'd put as much time into studying the Constitution as you do playing games on the internet, you would be a constitutional scholar. That's how easy the Constitution is to actually understand. And look, I only have a high school education. I'm a rogue, R-O-U-G-E scholar. All my education beyond high school is either on the job or through reading and studying things and stuff like that. And, I choose what I want to learn, not what some professor wants me to learn his indoctrination. I want to actually get down to the truth. And I do look at both sides of every subject. So real quick here, let me see here what I want to go to. This is something that keeps coming up time and time again, right? It's how bots broke the FCC's public comment system during the net neutrality debate. And what a lot of this is by Izzy Lepowski over at Wired.com, and this was posted on November 28th of this year. And I'll just read the first couple paragraphs here. On a single day in late May, hundreds of thousands of public comments poured in the Federal Communications Commission regarding its plan to roll back net neutrality protections. A week and a half later, on June 3rd, hundreds of thousands of more followed. The spikes weren't the voices of pro-net neutrality Americans worried what will happen if the FCC allows internet service providers to block and throttle content whenever it so chooses. In fact, they weren't really voices at all. And now let me stop the reading here real quick. This is what actually precipitated all of this internet rulings for the net neutrality was cell phone providers, not ISPs to my house, but cell phone providers were throttling phones that were viewing videos like Netflix or YouTube video, stuff like that, on their smartphones. And this is where a lot of this brouhaha has been up in arms about this net neutrality that got net neutrality started to begin with. It was actual cell phone providers that were throttling this because of their infrastructure. They didn't have enough infrastructure yet to have these people all the time just unlimited bandwidth on their smartphones streaming this stuff all the time. And so they had to throttle it, and they started putting caps on bandwidth per month, stuff like that, because and this is something that I have a hard time, and I know Don't Buy the Hype is telling me, that a lot of these people, they don't care about these arguments. They're not going to listen to these arguments. But cell phones, the rudimentary function of a cell phone is just that, a phone. Everything else it does, okay, especially when it came to the age of smartphones, is secondary to its primary purpose as being a phone. My son does not have a home phone. He uses his cell phone for everything, and there's a lot of people that do that. A lot of people have cut their cords on their telephones and just went straight cell phones. I still choose to have a home phone, but it's not through my local provider, which would be Verizon. And it's the only one that I'm allowed to have in this area. Another government-created monopoly. So instead of having to pay and they were outrageous rates, my minimum phone bill with Verizon was like $30 a month. And that was not making any long distance phone calls at all outside of and in this area had a very small area where I live that was actually in the what they call just local. And then you had local long distance, then you had national long distance. So, my phone bill, the smallest one I'd ever have would be like $30 a month, and then usually they hung around $45, $50 a month. And so when VoIP came out, I was one of the earlier users of VoIP. I went to VoIP over my computer, and now when we first got it, it was a little bit shaky in that, but I stuck with them because I saw the value in it. And today, when I pick up the phone, you can't tell if I'm on a landline or on a computer. And I only spend $23 a month for unlimited. I can call my uncle out in California, talk to him for hours on end, and it only cost me that base price. And even after I went to VoIP, and I kept my phone number and everything, I was getting deals from Verizon saying, "Oh, we'll match theirs," but it was only for a certain amount of months. They wouldn't just give me an unlimited service through Verizon, like PowerPhone, is who I have as my VoIP provider. They wouldn't give me an unlimited like them. It'd only be for so many months, and then it would go back to the regular rate. And I said, well, that's not a deal. I'm not going to switch for that. They were actually actively coming back and trying to get my business. But it started with the smartphones, and the cell phone providers were doing this. My local cable company was not doing this. There are stories where Comcast was trying to do this with Netflix, but quite honestly, I think most of them are anecdotal because I couldn't find any articles that actually gave any proof of that happening. Okay? But I'm not saying it's not out there. I'm just saying they didn't give any proof that it was happening. So I'm going to read on. According to multiple researchers, more than 1 million of the recorded 22 million comments the FCC received were from bots that use natural language generation to artificially amplify the call to repeal net neutrality protections. That number may only represent a fraction of the actual bot submissions. The New York Attorney General's office is currently investigating the source. But while reports so far have focused on bad actors flooding the FCC with phony content, some of those same techniques also follow legitimate groups like the Electronic Frontier Foundation to tell their members to click a button and send an auto-generated, albeit earnest, comment to the FCC, creating a groundswell of activism among actual humans. The result, a net neutrality comment period that garnered more input from the public than all previous comment periods across the government agencies combined. Now, personally, I have a little bit of problem. Well, actually, I should say a lot of problem with the Electronic Frontier Foundation doing something like this. Because if you're not telling people the truth and you're persuading them with lies to come and do something on your website like that, how many of those people actually knew what net neutrality was all about? How many people actually knew that net neutrality was actual government regulation of the internet, government controlling the internet? I bet you none of them. They were given that lie that these regulations were to keep the internet free. And again, you can't abandon free market principles to save the free market. It doesn't work that way. You cannot use government regulations to control the internet to make it free or keep it free. It doesn't work that way. The very essence or definition of government regulation is control. If you're controlling something, it's not free, period. So there's another article I have here that goes along the same line, and it's by Lizzie again. Let me make sure yeah, these are both by Lizzie Lepowski. Excuse me for the frog in my throat, folks. The FCC's net neutrality comments included millions of fake emails and more. Over a third, this was posted, let me see here, the FCC's, let me look down here. This was posted on the 29th also. Over a third of the nearly 22 million comments that poured into the Federal Communications Commission regarding the plan to repeal net neutrality protections included one of 7 identical messages. More than half were associated with duplicate or temporary emails, including some 7,500 affiliated with the address example@example.com. Dozens included references to the animated film Bee Movie, a film about the disillusioned worker bee that has become fodder for several popular memes. Roughly 1 million comments came from Pornhub.email addresses, Pornhub.com, email addresses, and more than 7,000 comments were submitted by a gentleman or woman named simply the Internet. These bizarre facts and figures come from a newly released Pew Research analysis of every comment submitted to the FCC, which in turn illustrates just how chaotic the comment process has become in the age of automated electronic submissions. Since the FCC comment period opened in April, researchers have documented the apparent existence of bots that use the natural language generation technology to masquerade as concerned citizens. But Pew's report shows that even well-meaning individuals and advocacy groups attempting to flood the system with earnest comments have contributed to the crippling of the process. As public opinion researchers, we find it a little bit hard to really make sense of the public's opinion on this issue, says Aaron Smith, one of the authors of the study. On June 19th, nearly 500,000 comments were submitted in a single second. A single second, folks, 500,000 comments. And honestly, and I don't care which side you fall down as pro or con on net neutrality, if you're for it or against it, I don't care which side you fall down on this. These bots, in my opinion, are bad. Because again, are these people really thinking about it, or have they been coerced or hoodwinked by some well-meaning folks that like net neutrality? Or the same way on the other side. Some people on my side haven't researched it. They just see, even though they may be right, they can't tell you why they're right when they see, well, if government's trying to regulate it, I'm against it. Which is, to me, a good attitude to have, a good skeptical attitude to have. Whenever the government says we're here to help, you need to be skeptical of that. And that's exactly what's happening with net neutrality. It was the Obama administration, oh, we're here to help to correct these issues on cell phone providers. And what they did was they just lumped the whole internet into the whole thing. And it was a regulation in search of a problem that wasn't there. I did a video earlier on that, months ago, about that. So according to Pew's review, only 6% of the comments were actually unique. The rest were submitted multiple times. Some of the most popular among them can be tracked back to legitimate organizations that have mobilized their communities either for or against the repeal. In fact, by far the most popular comment submitted an eye-popping 2.8 million times, accounting for a little more than 1 in 10 entries, was a pro-net neutrality missive promoted by television host John Oliver and featured on the website battleforthenet.com. 3 of the top 10 most popular comments, meanwhile, were anti-net neutrality messages promoted by the Taxpayers Protection Alliance. And again, I think on both sides of the issue, this has not been studied out. Matter of fact, Barnacle, he was polite about it. He seems to be a real nice guy. I'd love to do a Google Hangout with him and talk about this. But he said I was wrong and I need to do more studying on it. Folks, I've been studying this since 2015 when it first came in under the Obama administration. I've been looking at this. I didn't like it then. I sure don't like it now, because nothing has improved. Matter of fact, I don't have them at my fingertips here, but I have to look back into my show notes pages and that. But there's actual studies been going on about this, and I think Foundation for Economic Education, FEE.org, has had some articles, I think that's where they came from, talking about how innovation actually stalled after net neutrality was put in, mainly because of the uncertainty of it. But up until that time, it wasn't a Class 2 utility, as some people out there says. I think Barkley says in his video that it's been a Class 2, Type 2 utility all along, and it hasn't. It wasn't until 2015 that it was designated a Type 2 utility. And again, utilities are, for the most part anymore, are government-created monopolies. And like I said, here in Pennsylvania, the PP&L was deregulated a number of years ago, and you can actually shop around for your electric producer. If you don't want PP&L, you can buy somewhere else. If you're really into the greenness of the environment, you can buy just wind and solar generated electricity. But guess what? If you look at it, it costs a significantly it's significantly higher in kilowatt per hour cost than conventional, means of production, as far as electricity and stuff like that. So I haven't pulled the trigger on that green stuff because I like to keep the green in my wallet, if you know what I mean. So I wanted to point these out about the comments on these, okay? Honestly, I don't think you can look at these either way. And I hope they just don't throw the whole thing out and start over again with the comments, because I think it's even going to be worse than that. I think they can have companies sift through these and find out who the actual phone calls were and actually sift through those. But Ajay, I believe, even though he worked at Verizon, and as soon as he got in, and I haven't researched this, I was told on a couple different, they said this on a couple different YouTube videos, which it may or may not be true. And as far as I'm concerned, it's not true until I investigate it. But they said, that he stopped an investigation of Verizon as soon as he got in there. And so that sort of poisons the whole pill. Now, honestly, today's the first day I've heard that. As far as in earnest like that, I've heard whispers of it, but I haven't been able to prove it either way. And if you're a listener out there and you have any information on that, please go to the dancolumbushow.com and click on the contact page and send me an email. If I'm wrong about something, I want to be right. I'll correct myself, and I'll actually put it out here on the video. I'll humble myself and say, I was wrong. I was a dunderhead, and I need to get these things right. But there's another article over on Wired.com by Susan Crawford called Ajit Pai's Net Neutrality Shell Game. And this is something that I was actually reading some other articles about, where some of these big tech companies like Google, and I'm not sure about Microsoft, but definitely Google is for net neutrality. And I got to think, why would a big tech company be for net neutrality? And here, at first I was thinking about it, and it sort of dawned on me while I was working yesterday. Well, that's why that they're for net neutrality, because they want to stifle competition. And if this net neutrality stands, it will stifle competition. It will not bring about innovation, because no one's going to want to innovate in a system that they can't profit from, period. Because businesses are in the business of making profits. They're not some unicorn fairy ideology out there that, we're just happy producing this stuff and we're happy not to make a profit. It just doesn't work that way. And again, like I said earlier in the monologue, the reason why utilities were in such bad shape, especially electric utilities, is because the government set the price that they're allowed to charge. The government has no clue, and I have an article we're not going to get to, but if you go over to the dancolumbushow.com, my show notes page, I have links to all these articles on here. It says, let me see where that's at here. It's at Mises. Where's my Mises? I love my Mises to pieces. Okay, it's by Nicholas Freeling over at Mises.org. This was posted on the 28th of this month. Net neutrality. Government can't know the correct price for internet service. Even your local governments cannot know the correct price for the service, because it's not out in a free market competition. for the market to actually competition. Now, competition will only bring prices down so far. Okay, and that's the good thing about competition. Competition, if they're going to stay in business, cannot take the prices sub-level, as it were, unless you're, and I do want to take that back for a second there, unless you're Mr. Dow, the founder of Dow Chemical. And go back and do some research on the boron and what he did to the boron in the European boron industry. It was funny what he did to those folks. Anyway, that's a whole other side story there. But competition will only bring the prices down so far, and then you got to go by service and maybe some extra goodies that they give you that the other one's not willing to do. Things like that. Anyway, I've got bad news for everyone who is working overtime to protest Federal Communication Commission Chair Ajit Pai's campaign to eliminate net neutrality. You're being tricked. Pai is running a kind of shell game, overreaching. Go ahead and run the paid prioritization services you want, Comcast, so that we will focus our energies on the hard to pin down concept of net neutrality, the principle of internet access fairness that he has vowed to eliminate. Now, Susan Crawford, she's a columnist for the Back Channel and a professor at Harvard Law School. She's also the author of Responsive City and Captive Audience. Pai is hoping to use outrage over net neutrality to drive everyone into the mosh pit of special interest that is lobbying on Capitol Hill. There will be strident calls from every side for reworking the existing Telecommunications Act to ensure that net neutrality continues. Just watch. The incumbents will piously say, we like net neutrality too. We just need a different statute. That's a trap. We have a perfectly good statute already, and the Obama-era FCC's interpretation of that statute so as to ensure an open internet, including its labeling of 3 giant companies as common carriers, which was necessary in order to open internet rules to be enforceable, has already been found reasonable. And I honestly didn't go look at that link yet. I don't see anything reasonable about the government controlling anything. But anyway, on the Hill, the public will be out-lobbied at every turn by the essentially unlimited resources of Comcast, Charter, CenturyLink, Verizon, and AT&T. So, the real problem is a complete absence of leadership and policy aimed at making sure the low-price, ubiquitous, world-class fiber optic service reach every home and business. Left to their own devices, the giant U.S. companies Pai is determined to protect have every incentive to divide markets, avoid capital investments and upgrades to fiber that reach everyone, charge as much as they can get away with, and leave out poor and rural people. That is, in fact, what is happening here. The difference between the way the unrestrained profit at all cost driven operators run things and the way a public interest driven operator acts are obvious. For a clear illustration, take a look at Wilson, North Carolina. I recently traveled to Wilson, a town in the eastern part of the state that is known to most as an exit ramp off of I-95. I found it to be a scrappy place with a tradition of taking the long view, most notably by successfully developing a low-price fiber optic service. Earlier this decade, the citizens of Wilson weren't happy with the low-capacity connections and poor customer service offered by Time Warner Cable, now Spectrum. Wilson already had a public electric utility, so was familiar with the benefits of operating a utility in the public interest. It built its own fiber optic network and today offers 50 megabit per second service, equal uploads and downloads at $40 a month. Here's just a single example of the difference between Wilson's system and one owned by an unregulated member of the connectivity cabal. The ease with which you can access the service, particularly if you have limited funds. In Wilson, you can sign up for prepaid service with the same 50 megabit service or megabit per second capacity for $1.15 a day. It's highly automated customer experience. You call up a customer service, you say you want access, you can set up your account with as little as $10 and you're done. No credit check, no deposit, nothing. You can switch from postpaid $40 a month service to prepaid daily service with a phone call. Try that with a Verizon, Comcast, or AT&T. When you're about to set up your days, you can have a text, email, or call to go to you, or when you're about to use up your days, excuse me, you can have these things sent to you, these messages sent to you. If you haven't refilled your account, the service automatically shuts itself off. All you have to do is turn it back on as a call again or go online and refill your account. Wilson did this to make life easier for new customers or for customers who want to avoid signing up for a full month of service. It removes barriers to access and puts the customers in control, says Will Aycock, the manager of Wilson's Greenlight Fiber service. The $1.15 is the prorated per day amount for Wilson's regular monthly service, $39.95 for internet access alone. No data caps. When I asked Aycock why other internet access companies don't provide an equivalent product, he stumped. I have no idea, he said. I'm going to do some research on this, and I will be reporting on this tomorrow on Friday's show to check and see if everything's on the up and up here. Usually when it's a public utility, like a public-owned utility, there's also tax dollars involved with it, not just the user fees from the customers. There's also tax dollars involved in this, and I want to see if they actually shut out other internet providers in this town, like Time Warner. Again, I'm very suspicious of government owning the means of production or transmission or anything, because you have politicians that do not have an incentive to get it right. All they're looking at here in Wilson, and like I said, I'm going to report on this tomorrow a little bit further about Wilson, North Carolina. This is something I found towards the end of my research, and I didn't have time to go in and really get at the heart of it. But I just want to see where this, how this all works, and actually who owns it, and how the funding goes with this, and if anybody else is allowed to be in there. And I'll try to find that out between today and tomorrow. But again, I'm very suspicious of government trying to do these things. You know why? Again, through government deregulation, and especially, like I said, I'm a third-generation truck driver, and I lived through the deregulation of the trucking industry when Ronald Reagan became president, and seeing how that opened the floodgates of the economy. And this is one thing, they talk about the Reagan tax cuts, and this was only part of what actually launched one of the longest prosperous periods in American history. It was deregulation also. When he deregulated the trucking industry, he allowed competition, or that allowed competition into the trucking industry. Before that, you only had a handful of major carriers, and if their service was bad, tough, you'd only pick another one where service wasn't much better, and the costs were about the same. To when he deregulated it, anybody could go out and buy a truck and sign on with a company and start hauling freight. That drove freight prices down, and a lot of the big national carriers, it about drove them out of business. National was one of the biggest carriers back then, and they're still a good-sized carrier, but not like they used to be, because they had a monopoly, a semi-monopoly on the trucking industry because of the regulations. So deregulation is also part of economic growth, and I can only imagine how much further the economy is going to go once we get this stupid net neutrality out of the way. And it's stupid. It's stupid to believe, and I know I'm getting a little harsh here, and I don't like doing that, but doggone it, it is stupid to believe that government regulation is going to keep anything free and open. It just doesn't work. Has someone else show me? Act like I'm from Missouri. Show me. Don't just say it, prove it. Show me where this is the case. Obamacare did nothing of the sort. All Obamacare did was raise the cost of health insurance and services because it was government controlled. They took the economics 101 out of the equation, and the government was trying to set the prices on everything instead of letting the market set the prices on that. And you know what? Before all the government intervention in healthcare, what did people do before that? It wasn't like they were dropping like flies all over the place. So there's a lot of scare and fear-mongering going on, especially in the healthcare industry, but there's also a lot of fear-mongering going on with this net neutrality. That people live, again, like I said in my monologue, people live their lives. They live their lives in the free market. They make decisions each and every day on products that they buy and use, either in clothing or what they eat or the cars they drive, the gasoline they put in their cars, the tires they put on their cars, the type of TV they want to buy, the type of movies they want to buy or rent or watch or whatever. They live their lives in a free market economy in that respect. But when it comes to something as, and honestly, folks, people will not die if the internet goes away. You know, except for those folks that get their heart monitors checked over the internet and stuff like that. But, you know, I'm using this as just an example. You can't, you know, don't pin me down on every little thing on this. But by and large, the average user of the internet, if the internet went away, they wouldn't die tomorrow. They would not die tomorrow. It's just that simple. You know, to me, the internet's a luxury. The internet is a luxury, especially for first world countries. If the internet is that important, why aren't we setting aside money, actually giving more money to our ISPs and stuff like that so they can build infrastructure over in third world countries? Riddle me that, Batman. So again, it's real simple free market thinking as far as I'm concerned. Now, I'm going to wrap the show up with this one. My buddy Nick on Facebook shared this with me. He thought this would be interesting. This is from Wired.com also. This is by Ben Zoka, Matt Starr, and John Henke. And this was this one. Now, this one's got some whiskers on it. This article actually has some whiskers on it. This was posted back in July 16th of 2013. This is all in a run-up to Obama's FCC chairman initiating net neutrality. Don't blame big cable. It's local governments that choke broadband competition. And see, this is what I'm talking about. Not only were the smartphone carriers, you know, the cell phone carriers that were actually adding data, you know, whether it was in the form of text messages or, you know, voicemails, or where you could actually browse the internet and watch videos and stuff like that, they were struggling because, and this is something that always happens. Certain technologies actually outstrip or outpace other technologies. Smartphones actually were outpacing the infrastructure that was used at the time. Now that infrastructure's gotten better, and they've actually been, and I believe it's through competition more than anything, the cell phone providers have gotten massive. There's over a dozen nationwide out there that you can get. I'm on Boost Mobile. I'm not on one of the big ones, although I do use the Sprint network with Boost Mobile. Do I have the same reliability and coverage? I won't say reliability. My reliability is good on mine. I've never had a problem with that. It's just been my coverage with Boost Mobile. Is it the same as Verizon or AT&T? Not in this area, but other areas it is. Is it a problem for me? No. You know, if I don't have coverage someplace, I need to talk to somebody, I'm not going to pull my car over the side of the road and get out and throw a fit because I don't have phone coverage. I know because where I drive, you know, I'll wait a few minutes, and because like I said, nothing's life or death for the most part. 99.9% of the time, it's not life or death. It's only that 0.1%. It's only that 1% that's life and death. I can wait 5 minutes to get to the next town where I have good coverage. It's not a big deal for me. I get coverage at my house, but in between some areas, I don't have the best coverage. And I can even say that as a truck driver. AT&T and Verizon were the same way. They've gotten better over the years, but also they also have competitors who've gotten better over the years. So what's happened is, I had this problem with the ISPs for the phone companies. And it was, everybody was being very dramatic about it. They were overemphasizing or overblowing the whole situation. And it came to the politicians. Now, this is what you got to be thinking about here. It came to the federal government's attention. For the most part, internet was flying under the radar of the federal government because state and local municipalities were taking care of it. But as politicians are wont to do, they want their pockets lined. It's a sad fact. I wish it wasn't that way. I wish we could outlaw all lobbyists in Washington, D.C. and make them have to petition the members of the House or Senate at their home districts. And that would do one major thing. It would keep Congress out of session longer, so they can, and that would, the net benefit from that would be less regulation, less laws that are being passed. Because they wouldn't have the time to do it. They wouldn't be there. So anyway, that's just a little inside joke here for a lot of my longtime listeners here. But this is what happened. So the federal government saw a chance, politicians saw a chance, hey, we can make a little side money off this through the lobbyist on this. So why don't we go to the FCC and make them do net neutrality and begin this process of crony capitalism, this process of fascism? Why don't we get this started? So anyway, in this article here, despite public, political, and business interest in greater broadband deployment, not every American has high-speed internet access, yet alone a choice of provider for really fast, high-capacity service. So who's really to blame for strangling broadband competition? While popular arguments focus on supposed monopolists, such as big cable companies, it's government that's really to blame. Companies can make life harder for their competitors, but strangling the competition takes government. And that's, folks, that one sentence there. But strangling the competition takes government. There's a lot of comments I've seen about net neutrality where, oh, it's the big, bad, evil corporations that are doing this. And what incentive do they have of taking care of the little guy? They don't. That's what they're saying. Again, they've been told so long that corporations are so bad and they mistreat their customers so much that we can't trust them. So we got to turn to government. And these big bad corporations, some of these bad actors, they understand this principle, so they use some of their money, profits in other words, to pay off politicians to get their competition strangled or stifled. So it takes government to strangle competition. If you learn nothing from this show today, I want you to learn that one principle. Strangling the competition takes government. Broadband policy discussions usually revolve around the U.S. government's Federal Communications Commission, yet it's really our local governments and public utilities that impose the most significant barriers to entries. Game of kickbacks. Deploying broadband infrastructure isn't as simple as merely laying wires underground. That's the easy part. The hard part, and the reason it often doesn't happen, is the pre-deployment barriers with local government and public utilities make unnecessarily expensive and difficult. Before building out new networks, internet service providers must negotiate with local governments for access to public-owned right-of-way, so they can place their wires above and below both public and private property. ISPs also need pole attachment contracts with public utilities so they can rent space on utility poles for above-ground wires or in ducts and conduits for wires laid underground. The problem? Local governments and their public utilities charge ISPs far more than these things actually cost. For example, right-of-way and pole attachment fees can double the cost of a network construction. So the real bottleneck isn't incumbent providers of broadband, but incumbent providers of right-of-way. These incumbents, the real monopolists, also have the final say on whether an ISP can build a network. They determine what hoops an ISP must jump through to get approved. Now, I'm going to stop reading there. And I want you to go do, this is your homework assignment, folks. I want you folks to go and look this up. Microsoft has been testing and actually has deployed, and it seems to be working very well out in the Midwest, broadband internet. We're talking about approaching cable speeds, better than DSL, way better than DSL, and approaching actual really good broadband speeds using unused TV airwaves. Now, they were looking to do this for rural America. However, a lot of these TV signals that are not being used today are real easy to start back up because the transmitters are already there, because there's still a lot of TV out there that is still being broadcast. There's still a lot of bandwidth on TV signals that are not being used, the white noise channels. And so Microsoft has figured out a way, and still studying it and trying to perfect it, but they figured out a way to actually transmit broadband internet over that. Now, this goes back to the competition part of this. What happens if Microsoft really onto something here, and they're the pioneers in this, and they really roll this out in a big way because they have the deep pockets, they can do that. And let's say out here, let's say they can offer me the same amount of bandwidth, the same up and down speeds that I have, and the same amount of bandwidth per month that I have now, which that's called throttling, folks. I have that under net neutrality here. If I go over that, they don't actually throttle it, but I have to pay an exorbitant amount for extra bandwidth over what I buy per month, which doesn't make sense to me. So I got to make sure I self-throttle myself. So that's happening under net neutrality. So how is that a thing, right? But anyway, Microsoft could be the dragon slayer here. And the initial, when anything like this rolls out, they're talking about the cost for the consumers like $1,000 for the equipment. But they imagine if they roll it out and they get enough customers, that cost is going to come down very, very quickly, to somewhere in the $200 range. And I think that's fairly affordable for folks. And like I said, if they charge me at the same price or less than the cable, I could take that back to my cable company saying, look, I can get this broadband through Microsoft, through their television broadband, cheaper than what you're giving me. I said, do you want to make a deal with me, or do you want to lose my business? And I can see a lot of people doing that, because people don't want to foolishly throw away their money. And then in some of these other videos I was actually watching, they were actually talking about the Wi-Fi networks. Well, they really didn't take off. The problem with the Wi-Fi networks is you need to use, again, like if I want to do a Wi-Fi network out here, I got to go through the local ISP who has monopoly on things, so I can't shop around. If I do Wi-Fi, and let's say Microsoft comes out and does that, and maybe some other people jump into that along with Microsoft, and there's a really good competition in there and it drives the price down, I might be able to afford to put a nice Wi-Fi tower up on my property and broadcast Wi-Fi and charge for it and become part of a Wi-Fi network. And matter of fact, my son uses a cell phone from Google that does not use conventional cell phone services. It's all Wi-Fi. And he has really good coverage. He lives down around Harrisburg. He has really good coverage. He comes up here. He has really good coverage in my area. So there is competition out there, but the problem is most people don't want to have to go look for that. Most people don't want to have to go and do the homework. They just rather, okay, it's already to my house. I'll just knuckle under and pay what they want me to pay. And if I wanted everything on the TV and the best internet, I'd be paying over $200 a month. I do not have cable TV. I do have good broadband because we watch a lot of TV on the internet. I have Netflix. I watch Netflix, Hulu, and Amazon Video. Almost all but one. I think ABC is lagging behind everybody, but they have apps out that we can watch the TV shows a day or two after they're aired on live TV that are free apps that you just have to suffer through the commercials just like anybody else does. And I'm okay with that. I don't mind commercials. I grew up with commercials, But if I want to wait a year or two, I can watch them on Netflix and just binge watch if I wanted to. But again, I also have a business here, and that's why I need the more bandwidth. And unlike that one comment I read at the beginning of the show, yeah, it is fair that the company charges me more for my bandwidth usage than he does somebody else who only checks their email and gets on and browse the internet once or twice a week. Why shouldn't I be paying more? Because I'm using more of their infrastructure. I'm using more of everything. I'm using more of their energy to do so because I have to put equipment on that runs off of energy in order for them to handle my bandwidth. They have costs that they have to pass on to their customers. They're in business to make money. I'm down with that. I'm in business to make money. I'm not here to, even though I don't charge people to watch my videos, hopefully someday I'll get some sponsors on the show. You know, but I'm here, I'm going to try to make a profit off of this. What's wrong with that? Nothing. I'm not being a bad guy. I'm not a horrible person for wanting to profit off of something that I do, that I put my blood, sweat, and tears in doing. And it's just, you know, honestly, folks, it's just that simple. You know, it's no more complicated than that. You know, you want to buy things at the cheapest price that you want to pay, but then you turn around and don't want companies or corporations to make profits. It just, that ideology is whacked, and it just doesn't make sense to me. Folks, if you like what you hear on the show, give me a thumbs up or thumbs down, and leave a comment either way. You know, I'll answer your comments as the best of my ability. And if you really like what you see on here and you want to help me further this, I have a Patreon page. I also have a PayPal that you can directly support, hopefully with a monthly contribution, to help me get going here until advertisers can help pick up the slack. And please subscribe and hit the notification button if you really like the show here. This has been the Dan Clements Show. I'm your host, Dan Clements, your constitutional warrior. Remember, if you aim at nothing, you hit it every time. Have a great rest of the day, folks, and God bless. And we'll see you tomorrow at noon for Free for All Friday.